Hello and welcome to Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook and I am very excited to be telling you all about my new subscriber service. If you subscribe to Harmonious World, you will get a weekly email and you will get a monthly podcast episode that nobody else gets to hear. You will also get a shout out on the next episode after you subscribe. But more importantly, you'll be helping me to keep this podcast going and to keep getting some great guests. In your weekly email, you will hear all about some of the exciting guests I've got coming up. And in the monthly podcast, I will be giving you clips of some of the forthcoming artists, so not just the ones that you're listening to at the time. So I hope that sounds like an exciting prospect. It's not a huge amount of money, and I hope that you feel that you would like to join me. So my first subscriber is Richard from the UK. Thank you, Richard, for subscribing. But please do subscribe because it really will help me. Now on to this week's episode. For this episode, I'm joined by composer and clarinetist Derek Bermel. His new album, Intonations, is out now, featuring music for string quartet, electric guitar, solo clarinet, and solo violin. This is 5 world premiere recordings of works created by Derek and featuring some amazing musicians. What you're listening to now is Thracian Sketches. I hope you're enjoying it and I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. Hi, Derek.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right.
Thank you for joining me for Harmonious World. I'm really grateful for your time. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about Intonations, this new album.
Yeah, me too. That's great. Thanks for taking the time.
These pieces were all written over quite a long period of time. So what made you suddenly bring them all together into one album?
You know, so much of what we do in music is based on relationships. And so this is a really long-standing relationship, a friendship that I've had with individual members and the group of the Jack Quartet as a whole. And so I tend to think as time goes on of these different albums that I've done as almost traces or like log books of the relationships between me and some other musician or group of musicians, group of artists. And so I think what we were trying to do was to put together a document that showed that trajectory over a number of years. And that's really what it ended up being. And in a way, almost like we were planning a concert. And we wanted that concert to showcase the things that we could do together and the ways that we went through learning different things together.
I'm fascinated by the arrangements, by the orchestration that you've got going on there, because there's nothing that's traditional about it, is there? You've got all sorts of not strange combinations, but interesting combinations of instruments.
Yeah, probably the most traditional thing is the first thing that you hear on the album, which is the string quartet, right? That's right. Where it all starts. And in a way, I think that piece embodies a number of aspects of our kind of journey together. And I think it's because the string quartet itself is a very old institution. Of course, at one time it was very young, but in Haydn's time. But now it feels like almost like a hill that you have to climb. It's as a composer, at least. Part of that is because of the homogeneity of the ensemble, and part of it is just that there are so many great string quartets out there. So you hope to put your mark there somewhere, but you don't really know. So it's a daunting task to write a string quartet, and I wrote that quartet specifically for them. Um, as I wrote the clarinet quintet for them, also, which we played together. So that was a different type of bonding experience. Um, and then I did this arrangement of the electric guitar quintet, I guess you'd call it, ritornello, for the Jack Quartet. Also, originally it was written for Wieck Heimanns, the soloist, as a concerto, a string with string orchestra. So I had to sort of kind of reduce it. I had to tighten it up a lot, and that's an interesting task in itself. But so all these were these different tasks that I did along with the Jack Quartet. It was along this journey that we had together over about 10 years, you know.
Right. I'm interested by the fact that you're a clarinetist, but you're fundamentally, this is not an album about your clarinet playing, is it? This is fundamentally an album of your compositions, because you actually don't appear on it that much.
Right. I guess if I had to divide myself up, I'd probably be 70% composer, 20% clarinetist, 10% other. I don't know, like mentor, teacher, whatever, writer. Sometimes I like to write about music. Every now and then I conduct, but it's really I see myself primarily as a composer, and I imagine other people probably also see me that way, but it depends how they interact with me, because I suppose there are people who think of me more as a clarinetist, like the people who play in the ensemble at the Copeland House, since I play with, or if I played concertos with orchestras, they would think I was more of a clarinetist. But, I think my profile is more of a composer, and I've always approached my clarinet playing through the lens of being a composer. So I tend to choose to play new music. And even when I play old music, I do maybe a little bit of a twist on it. And incidentally, I'm just working on a project, just finishing up a project for Anthony McGill, the clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic. And Anthony had asked me to arrange one of the Saint Georges, Joseph Bologna concerti, violin concerti for clarinet. So again, he wanted me to do it because I'm a clarinetist. He knows me, and he's actually played my clarinet quintet with the Jack Quartet, in fact. Um, but so he thinks of me as a composer who comes at things from a clarinet standpoint. So I think that's why he asked me to do that, and it's a great it's really transcription itself. Whether you're transcribing your own work or somebody else's work, it's a really interesting process of getting into the work and trying to see how you can transform it from one state of being to another. It's like going from water to ice or something like that.
Excellent. I've read your biog and things, and you've worked with Wynton Marsalis. He's
Yeah.
the whole Marsalis clan is interesting because they don't know where they fit in terms of classical and jazz and everything else. That's fascinating. So how did that happen, and what sort of things have you done with Wynton Marsalis?
Well, the big project I did with Wynton was that I wrote a piece called Migration Series. And that was a work for jazz band and orchestra. And Wynton was particularly interested in that because he himself has several pieces for orchestra that incorporate a jazz band or a jazz orchestra within it. So this group of about 17 players, usually, four trumpets, three trombones, five reed players, and then a rhythm section, usually of three or four. That's the general setup. That's like Duke Ellington or, Fletcher Henderson, any of those great big bands. And so I wrote that piece for his band plus the American Composers Orchestra, where at that time I was composer in residence. That was about 15 years ago. And we performed it at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and it was a lot of fun but it was also a puzzle because, as Wynton knew, because he's done this many times, trying to write, there are a number of kind of contradictions in the way that the musicians approach things, and so, for example, the players in to get the rhythmic kind of cohesion. In an orchestra, you look right in front of you. There's a conductor standing in front of you, waving their arms. Well, in a big band, the conductor doesn't do much. Kind of 1, 2, 3, and walks up stage.
Yeah.
But in fact, you get the rhythm from listening behind you. So you're not only focusing a different sense, but you're focusing that sense in a different direction. So there are a number of things like that, some of which have to do with the nature of swing, which orchestras don't do so well, and also just the nature of what you read, how much you read off the page, and how much you bring your own interpretation and improvisation into that. So I think there's a lot of challenges built into that, and that's something that I explored in that scenario with the Jazz at Lincoln Center with the orchestra, which Wynton was playing in the premiere, and so I was very grateful for that opportunity to explore all those interesting contradictions, but also to try to find a way that those two groups could be complementary rather than working against each other. And so that was what ultimately I think helped make the piece successful. But I also had to do a lot of tweaking along the way in order for that to be the case.
I'm sure. I've done that a few times. As I'm a sax player, I've done that a few times where I've worked in with that combination of a big band with a symphony orchestra, if you like. And
oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
and it's a challenge, and I'd never thought about it before. But you're absolutely right. That's what it is, because I'm used to taking my cues from behind me, not from having somebody waving their arms around in front. So yeah.
And it's these are all ways of being a musician that are, come from different traditions, and so they expand. I mean, when we talk about diversity, I suppose, it's a very kind of cliched word now, but that's diversity in the best sense, because it's using all of our senses, all of our histories, combined knowledge, and bringing that to bear, hopefully in a complementary way. The key as a composer is trying to figure out how to do that in a complementary way and not bring greater problems on everybody and expectations that are going to be not met. So
Right.
I think that's just experience, and that's something that I don't know what music you played when you were doing that, but there are some really interesting pieces that some of which are grand failures, I would say, and some of which work pretty well. And everyone from Gunther Schuller to Sofia Gubaidulina, they're really interesting experiments from all over the world. And so I like to think that some of the really best combinations were the Maurice Perez arrangement of Duke Ellington's Harlem, which works so beautifully.
Yeah.
And there are other such kinds of combos.
Now seems a good time to be playing an extract from Intonations, this 3-movement work by Derek Bermel. And this is the second movement, Homily. And it's got that pitch bending, the blues, sort of slightly out of tune. This is great. I hope you enjoy listening to this brief extract. I love those sort of things because they make you think in a different way. And as a musician, that's always a good thing. If you're thinking in a different way, you're much more in the moment because you have to be.
Yeah, I mean, you want to try to energize the musicians as a composer. I mean, you want to try to energize the musicians enough. It's like a bell curve. It's like you want it to get to the point where they're working using all the best parts of their musicianship, but not so much that they're getting fatigued and
Right.
frustrated. And so trying to get to that apex, and it's not one spot. It's a little bit like quantum physics. It kind of escapes you like where that spot is, but you want to try to aim as close as you can to that spot so that you can find that be near that place of maximum um, epiphany inspiration for the musicians, because they are your mouthpiece. Because when I play my music, okay, I can play it and then it lives or dies with me. But when other people are playing it, I have to get them to that level. And that's part of the secret sauce of being a composer, is trying to figure out the psychology of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course we're talking about like large ensembles, but on this album it's much more about the intimate, the small relationships. And we started off by talking about your relationships with other musicians, and that really comes across. This is not an album that where random people are just playing your music. This is obviously something where people get it, and then you've understood them. And I didn't realize that some of the music was composed for some of these people. So,
Well, that's the thing, again, when if you're Beethoven these days, if you're Beethoven, that you can get a lot of performances. And so you're not so worried that, well, one might not be so good. But let's even say if you're a composer who's widely performed like John Williams or somebody, that you know that, you'll always get another performance. But most of us as composers, we don't know if this is going to be the last recording,
right.
or at least the last one for our lifetimes, or at least for the next 5, 10 years, of these pieces. So it's very important in a way. This document is very important to me as a composer, and I always approach it that way in the process. So I try not to skimp on uh, thinking about how important that is, and trying to arrange the whole process of recording in that way, and certainly getting the right group to do it, because that's half of it, or more than half. Maybe that's 90% of it, is having the right people with you as collaborators on the
Yeah,
journey.
sure. Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about your background, where you come from?
I'm from New York. I mean, I probably live now, 5 miles from where I was born, and I live probably less than a mile from where my grandfather was born. So I haven't moved all that much in terms of where I live, but I did spend many years traveling around and learning different styles of music in different places. Um, Luckily, before COVID years, you know, I started I started playing music when I was quite young, but I started the clarinet around 7, and then I uh, I started composing. My grandmother had this very beat up piano that she managed to get from one of her relatives who didn't need it anymore. When it almost didn't play, but it played just enough that when she got this upright, she got it to her house, and that was maybe the greatest gift I ever got when I was about 11. And I immediately started composing and improvising. And actually, you mentioned the Thelonious Monk poster back there, but Monk was really one of my first inspirations and one of the first composers that I spent a lot of time listening to and trying to take the music right off the record. At that time, there were records.
Yeah.
And so I really owe a great debt to Thelonious Monk, as well as many other composers. Of course, when I was young, I just soaked up a lot of stuff. And then then I kind of, I don't know, I was not sure really what I wanted to do. necessarily. I thought I'd end up in music, but I was teaching kids. I worked a lot of odd jobs in the years after college, and then I traveled to Jerusalem to study composition there and ethnomusicology with a wonderful teacher named Andre Haidu. And after that, I came back to the States. I was teaching kids in a gospel choir and like running an African drum ensemble. I mean, I was doing these things that were a little bit like I would get some knowledge by studying with teachers, and then I would apply it when I had a teaching gig. And then I eventually applied to University of Michigan, and I was lucky to get in. And then I went to study with William Bolcom there, who was my teacher for several years. William Bolcom and Albright, those were my two teachers. Bill Albright, who was an organist also. And they had studied in Europe, and that was a much more sophisticated kind of teaching that I got there at Michigan. Then when I was an undergrad at Yale, I was singing in an a cappella group and doing all kinds of playing in rock bands and things like that. Then I went to Europe and studied with two composers there, which was very also important for me from a philosophical standpoint. I think one was Louis Andriessen in Holland, and the other was Henri Dutilleux in Paris. And I would go back and forth on the train between those two places. So those years were pretty important for me. Then I came to New York and just kind of became a freelancer and was playing a lot and working odd jobs and composing.
That's fascinating, though. You started off by saying you live 5 miles from where you were born and where your family was from, and yet you've got such an eclectic experience of musicians around the world. So it belies that original statement, I guess.
Well, I think it's because I was always the type of musician that if I wanted to learn a style, I wanted to get my hands on it. Like I wanted to learn how to play it. So as an American, having grown up playing a lot of jazz, a lot of classical music, the mystery was African music, because that was like the other side of American music, because I knew about a lot of the European side from the clarinet playing that I did. I played a lot of French music, a lot of concerti. But I didn't know the side of jazz that was coming from African music. I didn't understand what that was exactly. And so to get deeper into that, I decided to try to save up my money and go. And so there was one point when I had saved up a few $1,000s, and I thought, this is it. I'm gonna try to go. And I went to Ghana and I studied the xylophone. I spent about 4 months in a village just studying xylophone there with traditional xylophone in the northwest of Ghana, near Burkina Faso. Then I went up into Burkina Faso a little bit, came back with malaria and dysentery. So, it was kind of unavoidable at the time. But that was about 30 years ago. Now I think about it, it was the summer of 1992. And after that, I went to Brazil, I went to Ireland, I went to Bulgaria to study these different styles. But I was always drawn by my ear to a particular style. And I thought, I want to learn that. It wasn't just random. It would always be, I was attracted to a kind of music and I wanted to learn how it was made from the inside, learn the rules by playing it, So that's kind of what I did. I just apprenticed with people, kind of hung around and tried to play.
Right, which is why this album in particular is, I mean, it's impossible to classify into a specific genre or a specific type, which is lovely because it weaves its way through all sorts of different things, rhythmically and melodically and harmonically and everything. So it's a fascinating album. I've really enjoyed listening to it and really kind of trying to get my head around the different where you were coming from it, which is just great. So thank you.
Why did the Brits like this album so much? I mean, I'm half British because my dad was British. He was a playwright, and he was from London, from the south side of London, Stepney.
Okay.
Where are you from?
Hertfordshire, just north of London, actually.
Oh, okay. I know that.
Yeah. So Stepney is East London, really. I think not.
Yeah,
south,
East. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, near the Armory. He was from Woolwich. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's very good. Excellent.
It was bombed during the war. I mean, his whole neighborhood was bombed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that part of the world was decimated. It has now been regenerated, and it's now a very fancy, very expensive place to live. He probably, you probably couldn't afford to live there. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of like really fancy.
I can't even afford to live in Brooklyn anymore. So, yeah.
Oh, listen, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Derek. It's been lovely.
Oh, you too. Yeah. And thanks for, having your ears in that place. I really
Right.
appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Harmonious World, and that was Derek Bermel. What you're listening to now is Ritornello. It was originally commissioned for the Albany Symphony Orchestra. This is the version for electric guitar and string quartet. And this includes electric guitarist Weik Heymans and the Jack Quartet. Thank you for joining me for Harmonious World once more, and please do click on the show notes and have a look at Derek's website and see where, if you're in the States, where you can see some of his music being performed. And also do have a look at the subscribers channel to see whether that's something that you'd be interested in, and you'll definitely get bonus bits. So thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World, and this really is about trying to make the world a little more harmonious. So I hope you have a great week, and I will see you soon. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.